As a bookstore owner, one of the questions I get asked oftentimes with I can see pain in the questioner's eyes. How do I get my kid who doesn't like to read to read? The first thing that this question assumes is that everyone could learn to like to read. Do I think that that's true? I think that that's true if you give them many, many options. If you don't put them in a box, say, hey, you need to read nonfiction, or hey, you need to read fiction, or hey, you need to read classical literature, because everyone has interests, and those interests map onto books. There's a book about everything, right? So I mean, some people just like prescriptive things. Of like, how do I do something? I want to read nonfiction. I feel like I'm wasting time if I'm reading literature. I think that we can unpack that, and I think that people can be very surprised. And we'll do that later. But how do we get your kid to read? Or how do you get your husband or wife to read? Or how do we get you to read if you don't like it? Let's start with a kid. So number one, it's like understand your kid's interest. We don't want to give them a book like it's medicine. A book is preventive medicine. A book is something that you read to ground you. A book is something that you read to explore. A book is something that you read to keep your attention span and your childlike wonder alive. It is something that will provide an education to you, but you need to fall in love with it first before you start to take it every day, like it's working out, going to the gym because you're about to have a heart attack. It's like you need to fall in love with it, just like you need to fall in love with working out and things like that. Same thing. So how do we do that? Well, I'll tell you the first thing. Number one, like I said, find their interest and find a book that aligns with that. And it doesn't have to be like nonfiction type interest. It can be my kids like stories that are a little bit wonky, that have characters that maybe haven't fully grown up, that are a little bit silly, all these things, and say, okay, that's a low hanging fruit. That's the Captain Underpants type things. I understand that you don't want your kid to just read that. I understand that you want your kid to graduate above Diary of a Wimpy Kid and things like that. Not that those books are super bad or anything, but I understand that you want your kids' attention span to work when it's not just hit with jokes and things all the time. I get that. So many times parents say, hey, my kid only wants to read graphic novels. This is kind of one deviation above the base level of this question of my kid doesn't like to read. My kid will only read graphic novels. So what we're seeing in those two scenarios is my kid only wants to read if they're being entertained. And if they're being entertained like page to page to page to page. So I think that one thing we can accomplish here is your kid, to the movies they watch, if they like movies, which I hope that they do because it makes it a little bit easier, they have learned a concept by watching the movie. Something that's like an hour long. I can watch something, I can be engrossed in something that doesn't have explosions or punchlines every single second because there's something in me that's relating to this narrative that's evolving over this course of this movie, where I actually enjoy learning about these characters. I actually enjoy seeing these settings change and develop. I enjoy seeing this rise to climax and settling down. So there's a character that they like. There's a story that's unraveling that they're interested to see the ending of. It's not just short-term boom, boom, joke, punchline, all those things. Because those narratives oftentimes don't even have a story inside of them, right? It's just the setting is a place where the punchline can land. The character is not developed; they stay the same. So we want them to fall in love with a progression, with a narrative, with a story. Easiest way to do that is if you have found a movie that they like, and maybe there's a little bit of tweaking you have to do to say, hey, let's get off of some of these YouTube shorts, let's get off of some of these things, and let's try to get you on something that's a little bit more long form. Let's graduate you to a movie, and then let's find a book that there's a movie of that you like, and you're going to read that book because we know that you like it. And even if you don't want to do it at times, we're going to just persevere through it. We're not going to do something that's like a cliff for you. If a goal is too big, it becomes a cliff rather than a stepping stone, right? So it's like, okay, you can read 5 pages a day right before you go to sleep. You can do that. I'm not going to say, hey, we're not reading at all. Now I want you to go upstairs. I want you to read 30 pages. Let's not do that. Let's make this progressive. So we find a movie that they like. We give them a book, and we make it into bite-sized pieces where they can absorb it and where they actually enjoy it. And maybe they develop a little bit of discipline there, right? It's like, I didn't want to read tonight, but I read 5 pages. It took 5 minutes, and now actually I'm finding that I'm reading more than 5 pages because I want to see what happens next. Or this is getting to the part that I know that I like. And then they actually finish the book ahead of schedule. And then you look and you find the next one. And then maybe you graduate to, okay, look, this. I found kind of the story that they like. They like action, or they like comedy, or they like dystopian type fiction, or they like fantasy, they like sci-fi. I found what they like. So now I'm going to try something where they haven't seen the movie yet. And I'm going to say, hey, I want you to read this book first, and then we're going to watch the movie. Because I tell you, just like you kind of said last time, I asked you this question: was the movie or the book better? And in this case, you said the book was better. Well, I'm telling you, this time the book's better as well. And you know that you're going to like it probably. So let's go ahead and get in this book, and then we have the movie to look forward to. And I'm going to ask you the same question: was the book or the movie better? So you find a book that's very, very similar to the movie that they watched, or maybe it's even a sequel or something like that. And you get them involved in that, and hopefully they love that. And if they're having a hard time with it, then go ahead and say, hey, I know you're having a hard time with this. Let's read it together, or let's go ahead and watch that movie, see if you like it, and we'll just continue the book that way. But some of this just takes a little bit of just kind of pushing them along a little bit, nudging them, and helping them to fall in love with it. Because once they taste and see that it's good, you kind of find out what they like, then you're not leading a horse to water anymore. And that's the best thing that you can do. And then there's kind of the disciplined stoic perspective that we still want to instill and we still want to develop. That reading is learning, but you're not always going to absolutely love what you're reading, but it's how you get better. So reading also needs to become a discipline, but it does need to become discipline before it becomes something that they love, if possible. So that's my advice. Is if you have to start with a graphic novel, start with a graphic novel, start with whatever. But if you're having a hard time getting them involved in story and narrative, and that's kind of that fine line I want you to understand is there are different types of books, and ultimately when you're trying to teach someone to fall in love with reading, you're trying to teach them to fall in love with story. So just make sure that you understand that. Trying to get them to fall in love with narrative, trying to get them to fall in love with character development. And really, one more thing. If they're like 10 years old, you might as well show them The Princess Bride, just kind of just as an old tale of this, right? As there's a kid that doesn't even want to be read to. The book might be boring, and this is a way just to show them a story. So hey, this is a book, but this is a story, and you can tell it as a story with this older man telling it, and you see the story in the movie. This is what all these books are. So I encourage you, even like, to deviate a little bit from the school's curriculum or even the homeschool curriculum you're using, if it doesn't do these few things. When you read a book with your kid, or when you read a book yourself, just make sure that you take the time afterwards, or even while you're going through it. But I recommend after, because they're going to enjoy it more. If you write down, hey, what was the setting of this? How did the setting change? Who's the main characters in this? How did they change? Do you know what climax is? What was the climax of this? Rising action. What was the rising action in this? What led up to the climax? Falling action. How did things begin to resolve? Conclusion. How did things resolve? Like, make sure you go into those key points, because that way you can have a kid kind of assess story. And then the awesome thing is once you get them to fall in love with story, you should get them to do a little bit of creative writing and do those same things, but do the work in reverse and say, hey, before you write this story, let's go ahead and decide who your character is. Let's decide maybe just the core things. What do they do? What difficulty are they going to face? How are they going to change and get better? How is this thing going to conclude? So you have kind of a rough sketch. Say, okay, we have a rough sketch. The first thing we talked about when we sat down, we talked about setting, we talked about character. So go ahead and establish that. How are you going to establish that in your first pages? when your first time sitting down writing. Establish those two things: your character's name, where they're at, their location, that's your setting, and then maybe your second time writing. Let's go ahead and introduce some other characters in there, and then what are these characters going to do together? Like, how do they interact? Why do they interact? And then when and how some of this drama, this stuff that's going to happen to them, how is it going to unfold? Like maybe that's the fourth time you sit down. So you can kind of map this out with them and have them develop it. And before you know it, not only do they understand story, they can craft story. And that is something that the school system just really doesn't do a great job of doing right now. Is it gets them to produce something, it gets them to create something rather than to regurgitate something or memorize something, and that is absolutely invaluable. When your kid's imagination begins to work and they enjoy it and they understand, like I can create something within a frame. I can create something that's contained. I, I can choose to bring it outside of the boxes. I can choose to do all these different things. And like when you have an imagination that can create like that, it's like that's so much better than many of us adults have. And that's what we lose, and that's what we need to circle back to. And I encourage each one of you guys, make sure that you can do that too. Make sure that you can craft story, because at the end of the day, this is kind of getting a little preachy, and my apologies for that. But it's like if you can't craft someone else's story, then it's like, what are you doing to envision your future? Do you envision your future as some solid state, that it's just natural progression of what you're in right now, that nothing's going to change, that one day leads to the next, years go by, and then all of a sudden your life's over? Or can you envision a future that's better for you? Can you set goals and can you dream? Do you understand that you as a character can develop? Do you understand that you can meet that one person that might change your life for the better? That your life is not fixed? All those things. Dare to believe again. Dare to shape your own narrative. Dare to have your own story. Dare to develop all those things. So I'm just trying to encourage you guys. Story and narrative and meta narrative and all these things are far more important than we could ever realize. Your life exists within a story. Your child's life exists within a story. Let's start telling those stories. Let's start writing those stories. Let's start believing these stories. Again, you guys have a great day. This is David from the Happy Book Stack. Keep on reading, my friends.